Alright, what's up, you guys? I'm Luther Bravo, and this video is going to be being trans to or to not medically transition. And in this video, I'm basically just going to talk about medically transitioning, what that means, and I'm not going to get too in depth, but we're going to touch on some of the major topics. And this is mainly because one, it's Pride Month. Two, I'm trans. I'm about to get my first gender affirming surgery, and I thought this might be the best time to talk about it. Also, because the trans community is feels really big online, but it is very small in real life, and there are a lot of topics and a lot of conversations that people are having, and I think this might be kind of an introductory one, something for maybe if you're an ally or maybe if you're considering medically transitioning. I figured this video might help you and kind of be able to piece together some of the different talking points that people are having. You know, keep you in the loop and stuff like that. So first, who is trans? In my opinion, right? And there is some debate on this, but in my opinion, anyone who identifies outside of their gender assigned at birth would be considered trans, right? So trans women, trans men, those are obvious. Some people like the term trans mask or trans femme because they don't want to be associated with womanhood or manhood. That's totally cool. I know that indigenous people sometimes are two spirit. I know that's not across all indigenous tribes, but I know that there are some that use that term. And then you have genderqueer people and non-binary people, and the debate around this is more so about passing, but we'll get into that later. And then people who you know are not, right? So like you have drag queens and drag kings, right, which they can be trans, but they do not have to be trans, and a large majority of the people that are drag queens and drag kings are often not trans, right? So that's important to keep in mind. Um, Masculine lesbians are not trans. Feminine men are not trans, right? And you know it kind of feels like a no-brainer, but it's not. You know what I mean? And that's mainly because of passing, and we'll talk about that later. But yeah, so there are people who are trans, and there are people who are not trans, and there's people who are like trans adjacent, for lack of a better term. But yeah, right. So all of these people, though, all of those groups, in my opinion, can experience transphobia, and to different degrees will experience transphobia. But this isn't a video about that. So I'm going to try to stay on topic. I got my little notebook here. So the next thing I want to talk about is privilege. To medically transition does require a bit of privilege, right? It requires that you live in a place that is safe for you, whether not, and that's extends outside of your home, but to your community at large, right? Because going through a medical transition is not just a lot on the body, but it can be a lot to people who are perceiving you, especially people who are perceiving you on a regular basis. And if you're in an area where that's not safe for you to go through something like that, you probably won't, right? Because of self preservation. So that's one. Two is because of the cost, right? You do need some type of access to healthcare. Now, I know that um, prior to the Trump administration, there were more clinics that offer gender affirming care, just beyond Planned Parenthood, and there were more Planned Parenthood and more funding for things like that for people who do not have consistent healthcare coverage or any healthcare coverage. And obviously, with that being rolled back, and the possibility of um, Medicaid and Medicare no longer covering gender affirming care, that reduces access. Currently, with trans people not being able to go into the military, reduces access to healthcare for gender affirming care. So these are all things to keep in mind, because even though there are still options outside of uh, you know private healthcare coverage, that is the easiest and fastest way, if you have that, and the safest way to medically transition, right? Next is where things get a little bit dicey, and that's passing. So passing is a touchy subject for some, um, and it's mainly because of a few things. But the biggest thing I want to talk about is that passing does make you safer, right? Passing does make you safer, whether you're passing as your gender assigned at birth or your transition gender. It doesn't really matter if the majority of the public perceives you as that gender. You are safer, and that is because at least I'm in America. In America, for like the vast majority of my life, and even now, most people are like man, woman, man, woman, man, woman, or child, right? Now people are like man, woman, or other question mark. I do live on the East Coast, and so there's a bit more liberal. People are a bit more open-minded, and accepting. So that is like I said earlier about being in a safe place. That's one of the things I like to consider, right? And that does impact how safe you are if you do or do not pass. And so from there, I want to talk about like if you're on, um, your transition journey, medically transitioning, considering hormone replacement therapy or gender affirming surgeries or whatever, what have you. For some of you, it may be your goal to pass, and that's completely valid. For some others, it may not be your goal to pass. Maybe you only want XYZ. I don't know. You know what I mean? Maybe right, and that's mainly because not everyone experiences body dysmorphia the same way, right? So for some people, it is the goal. That is what they want, right? That is essential to them, for their mental health, right? For others, it is not, and passing might give them some form of anxiety. So whether you do or do not pass, you are valid in your transition. And it does not have to be a goal for you. It can be a goal for you. It doesn't make you any more or less valid if you do pass, right? Um, so that's that. Lived experiences is the next thing I want to talk about, because, like I said, I kind of want this to be more of a general video, and we'll get into some more specifics later down the road. But if you're transitioning from male to female, that's a very different transition than my transition from female to male. Than people who live as non-binary or gender fluid, who can still pass as their assigned gender at birth, right? And that comes with a varying degree of privileges. That comes with a varying degree of anxiety, of access, of community, of representation. Um, and That's very important to keep in mind if you are someone who is considering medically transitioning, because if you're on a low dose, obviously you will pass as your assigned gender for longer, but what your goals are will determine if you continue that, if you don't, and that's again completely entirely up to you, right? So that's really what I wanted to say on that. And also that the fact that people who don't medically transition do live a completely different experience than those who do medically transition. And that is something else to keep in mind when you're listening to somebody talking about the trans identity and the trans community, and what goals are and different things like that. Uh, it's important to keep in mind, is this someone who is medically transitioning? Is this where they're talking from? Is this someone who it didn't do that or doesn't need to do that or whatever? These are important things to keep in mind. And again, the last thing I really want to touch on is just the fact that the trans community is rather small. Um, it is rather small. So actually, there's something else I want to talk about after, but it is rather small, and everyone's transition is completely different. Everyone's timeline is completely different, whether that's because of healthcare access, external support from your family or community members or friends, things like that. Um, Job loss, paying for surgeries gets expensive. Paying for hormone replacement can be expensive. Some trans people want to have, their own biological children, and that's a whole other thing. Because do you have to stop, your hormone replacement therapy in order to get pregnant or not? And there's not a lot of science out on that either. Um, and that's mainly because there just isn't a lot of, or just hasn't been a lot of focus on the medical research terms for trans people for a long time. And so, you know, it is very different. How your body will react to hormone replacement therapy is very different than somebody else. So these are all things to kind of keep in mind and to consider um, when you're trying to make this decision if you're going to medically transition, because you are going through a second puberty. And so, although you will have experiences with people who are transitioning in a similar way that you are that overlap, they will be unique to you. And that's important to keep in mind. No one can tell you how to transition. I can't tell you how to transition. No one can tell you how to transition. People can give you tips, and some of those tips might work for you, some of them might not. But yeah. And then the last thing, and this is the real last thing that I want to talk about, is support. Because if you're going to medically transition, it is not easy. It is a beast. It is something that it's going to take over your life, right? And that's because everything is changing. Your body is changing. Your relationship with self is changing. Your actual relationships might be changing because you're changing so much, right? Your mentality will change. Your emotional state will change. Your appetite will change. So these are all things to 110% keep in mind that, if you're going to do this, I do hope that you have support. If you don't have support, I hope that you do make a conscious effort to get involved in more queer events and queer, um, the queer community, and find that support. Find people that will support you on your journey, to being you. So yeah, that's really what I want to talk to you guys today about. Whether you medically transition or not, if you identify as trans, you're trans, right? And if you want to pass or not, you're trans, right? If you pass 100%, and no one would be able to tell unless you told them that you're trans, that doesn't make you less trans. That doesn't make you more valid than someone who, is visibly trans, and being visibly trans isn't the only way to be trans. So, happy Pride. Good luck. Have fun. And yeah, I'll see you guys next time.